Hi everyone. Today's video is about beta thalassemia. If you want to skip to any particular section of this video, you can do so by clicking the timestamps found in the description section below. Now let's go to beta thalassemia. The cause of beta thalassemia is a point mutation, one or more, in the beta globin genes. These genes are located on chromosome 11. Each one of us has two beta globin genes, one on chromosome 11 that we got from mom and one from chromosome 11 that we got from dad. The point mutation causes either beta 0 or beta plus mutation. Beta 0 mutation means that there's no production of beta globin genes. Beta plus mutation is that there's a reduced beta globin gene production. Clinically, the severity depends on whether one or both genes are affected and whether the mutation is a beta plus or a beta 0. Potential combinations of this therefore includes being a heterozygous mutation, that is, a person has one normal beta globin gene and one beta 0, or one normal beta globin gene and one beta plus. Either one of these combinations leads to a person having beta thalassemia trait, or also called beta thalassemia minor. People can also be homozygous for the mutation. This means that they can either have a beta 0 combination or a beta 0 beta plus combination. These people are said to have beta thalassemia major. Sometimes it's also called Cooley's anemia. And then there are intermediate mutations. This is called beta thalassemia intermedia. And this form is a clinical diagnosis. So let's bring all of this together and summarize the pathophysiology in beta thalassemia. So the issue in beta thalassemia is that there's insufficient beta chain production. This leads to an excess production of unpaired alpha chains. This is highly unstable. The excess alpha chains form precipitates and cause damage to red blood cell membranes, which leads to red blood cell hemolysis. Let's talk about clinical features. So when it comes to beta thalassemia minor, remember the issue is that this is a heterozygous mutation. There's one normal beta gene and one abnormal beta gene. Usually this is clinically asymptomatic. It's discovered accidentally on a CBC. You might see mild microcytic anemia, but no significant symptoms. There's no hepatosplenomegaly. People might have mild fatigue or pallor, but functionally they're usually well. They're often misdiagnosed as having iron deficiency anemia, but ferritin is in the normal level or it's usually high. In terms of the physical exam, it's usually normal, and there are no bone deformities, no jaundice, no splenomegaly. Now let's talk about beta thalassemia major. People with beta thalassemia major are homozygous or compound heterozygous for beta 0 or beta plus mutations, and therefore they have a complete or near complete absence of beta globin production. So clinically, people tend to have symptoms of beta thalassemia major between the ages of 6 to 12 months. The reason for this is our hemoglobin F, that is the fetal hemoglobin, tends to deplete around this time, and therefore our bodies are supposed to start picking up by making hemoglobin A, which includes two alpha globin genes and two beta globin genes. In beta thalassemia, there's an issue with the production of beta globin genes, and therefore the body is unable to pick up the production of hemoglobin A. Hence, the symptoms start presenting between the ages of 6 to 12 months. The symptoms could be severe anemia, which includes pallor, irritability, poor feeding, and failure to thrive. Jaundice is also common, and this is due to hemolysis. Hepatosplenomegaly could also be common, and this is due to the extramedullary hematopoiesis and also red blood cell destruction. When our bodies cannot produce enough red blood cells in the bone marrow itself, our spleen and our liver starts to pick it up, and this is what's called extramedullary hematopoiesis. And also, one of the purposes of our spleen is to destroy bad cells that aren't functioning properly, and because in beta thalassemia major the hemoglobin is unstable, therefore the red blood cells are unstable, the spleen starts to destroy them as well. You might also see bone deformities because of bone marrow expansion. Commonly, something that's seen is called hair on end skull appearance on X-rays. This is sometimes also called crew cut skull. You can also see frontal bossing, which means that the forehead area is a little bit more expanded, and maxillary overgrowth as well. Other clinical features include growth retardation and delayed puberty. People might also have recurrent infections, and this is due to hypersplenism, iron overload, and chronic illness. In terms of cardiac health, people might have cardiomyopathies and arrhythmias. This tends to be due to mostly iron overload, as well as anemia, where the heart is trying to pump enough blood in order for tissues to get enough oxygen. In terms of the liver, you might see liver cirrhosis and hepatocellular carcinomas as well. And in terms of the endocrine system, you might see diabetes, hypothyroidism, and hypogonadism. Pigment gallstones leading to biliary colic and cholecystitis can be common as well, and this is from the chronic hemolysis leading to elevated bilirubin. From a physical exam point of view, before you do anything, some things you might be able to see is marked pallor, jaundice, hepatosplenomegaly. Characteristic facial features are also common, so the frontal bossing, malar prominence because of the maxillary overgrowth, depressed nasal bridge, again, because of the maxillary overgrowth, and malocclusion leading to like the chipmunk faces can also be seen. Other skeletal deformities can also be observed. Signs of iron overload would include cardiac enlargement, so maybe the cardiac apex would be displaced. Endocrine abnormalities relating to diabetes and hypogonadism can also be seen. In terms of beta thalassemia intermedia, this is a clinical diagnosis. So anyone that has significant symptoms more than that of people with beta thalassemia minor, however, less than that of beta thalassemia major would fall in this category. So there's a moderate reduction of beta globin chain production. However, the severity can be variable. Clinically, this presents later in childhood or during adolescence. Moderate anemia can be present, so you could still see pallor, mild jaundice, and fatigue. There is no need for regular transfusions, however, you might need it during certain illnesses or pregnancy. Extramedullary hematopoiesis may be present. They may experience some bone pain and skeletal deformities. Hepatosplenomegaly from increased hematopoiesis in hemolysis also could be common. Again, this depends on each person. Gallstones due to chronic hemolysis again could be present. Leg ulcers due to chronic anemia and poor oxygenation could be present as well, and this is relevant for beta thalassemia major as well. And growth retardation and delayed puberty, again, similar to that of beta thalassemia major, could be present, could not be present. However, not all of these would be present in beta thalassemia intermedia, whereas most of them would be present in beta thalassemia major. In terms of the physical exam, again, they fall on the severity spectrum. You could see pallor, mild jaundice, moderate hepatosplenomegaly, and possible bone changes, including frontal bossing and maxillary prominence as well. Now let's talk about lab findings for beta thalassemia. In beta thalassemia trait, for CBC and red blood cell, the hemoglobin would be slightly decreased, somewhere around 100 to 120. MCV would be slightly decreased as well, maybe less than 75. Remember, normal is between 80 to 100. And in terms of red blood cell count, it could be normal or increased. And this is what distinguishes beta thalassemia trait or beta thalassemia from iron deficiency anemia, similar to that of alpha thalassemia as well. Um, In iron studies, ferritin would be normal or increased, and serum iron and TIBC would be normal. Hemoglobin electrophoresis, you'd see an increase in hemoglobin A2, usually more than 3.5, and this is a hallmark finding for beta thalassemia trait. You might see normal or mildly increased hemoglobin F, however, decreased hemoglobin A. When it comes to beta thalassemia major, the lab findings in terms of the CBC would be severely decreased hemoglobin, usually less than 70 and often between 30 to 60 before transfusions. The MCV would be decreased, which would be less than 70. Red blood cell count would also be decreased. In terms of the peripheral blood smear, you'd see target cells, nucleated red blood cells, and basophilic stippling. In terms of the iron studies, you'd see increased ferritin, and this is from transfusion and increased absorption. I'll talk to you about increased absorption of iron when it comes to different types of thalassemias as well. In terms of serum iron, it would be markedly increased. The TIBC would be normal or would be low, and transferrin saturation would be increased somewhere around 80 to 90%. The reason for TIBC being normal or low is, let's just recall what TIBC is. So TIBC measures the total capacity of transferrin to bind and carry iron in the body. The liver typically produces more transferrin in response to low iron stores. However, in beta thalassemia major, there's excess iron, so there's not a lot of need to produce transferrin. And also, along with high iron causing issues to the liver, causing damage to the liver, this can lead to a normal or even low transferrin and TIBC levels. In terms of transferrin saturation, that increases. Transferrin saturation is the ratio of serum iron to TIBC. Since there's a massive amount of serum iron and a normal or low level of TIBC, the proportion of transferrin that is saturated with iron becomes extremely high. So, when transferrin saturation exceeds 80%, the liver's primary iron binding protein, which is transferrin, is essentially fully saturated. And then when it comes to the hemoglobin electrophoresis, you'd see marked elevation of hemoglobin F somewhere around 90 to 100%. You'll see normal levels or slightly increased levels of hemoglobin A2, however, absent or near absent amounts of hemoglobin A. And then when it comes to beta thalassemia intermedia, in the CBC, you will see a hemoglobin again decreased, but somewhere around 70 to 100. MCV would be markedly decreased as well, less than 70, and red blood cell counts would be normal or high. In terms of iron studies, ferritin would be normal or mildly increased. In terms of the TIBC, it would be low normal or low, and transferrin saturation would be high. And in terms of hemoglobin electrophoresis, you will see somewhat of a high hemoglobin A2, somewhat of a high hemoglobin F, and low hemoglobin A. Now let's go to the management of beta thalassemia. When it comes to beta thalassemia minor, which is also called beta thalassemia trait, usually there is no treatment that's required. Sometimes folic acid could be indicated. You want to avoid iron supplementation unless iron deficient, and this means a ferritin level less than 30. And genetic counseling needs to be offered to families in order to prevent severe forms in the offspring. When it comes to beta thalassemia intermedia, these patients might require periodic transfusions if symptomatic or if their hemoglobin's less than 70. If the children, they're having poor growth, if they have bone deformities or high output cardiac failure. Folic acid again might be indicated to support erythropoiesis. Iron chelation is important, especially if it's if their ferritin's more than 1,000. It's also important to monitor for complications like pulmonary hypertension, gallstones, osteoporosis, iron overload, and all the consequences that come with being iron overloaded. Splenectomy, again, may be considered if they're having symptoms of hypersplenism. When it comes to the management of beta thalassemia major, regular lifelong blood transfusions would need to be considered, and sometimes for some patients, it's every 2 to 4 weeks. It's important to maintain a pre-transfusion hemoglobin rate of somewhere between 90 to 100, although this may be difficult to achieve in some patients. Regular transfusion suppresses ineffective erythropoiesis, which is important, and prevents bone deformities. Iron chelation is important in order to keep ferritin levels less than 1,000 to prevent iron overload. Folic acid supplementation may be considered to support erythropoiesis. Endocrine, hepatic, and cardiac monitoring is important due to the risk of iron overload. The only curative therapy is allogenic hematopoietic stem cell transplant, ideally done in childhood before severe iron load symptoms develop. There are also, however, emerging treatments as well, like gene therapy, that are being studied in clinical trials in Canada and globally. And that concludes this video. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.